Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of MagicReview.com. Today is January 2nd. That's right, 2 days in a row, 2 videos in a row. So far, my New Year's resolution is on track. We're still in Book Week Part 2, and we've got Conversation as Mentalism Volume 2 by Mark Elsdon. I'm a big fan of Mark Elsdon. I did have a couple issues with this book, however, but this is one of those ones that I talk about this a lot. It doesn't happen very often, but I do try to point this out to you guys, that there has been times where I would actually do the trick that is in a book or a product, but the product gets a bad review. And on the other hand, I very often do give good reviews to stuff I would never do. The reason why, just as a refresher, or if you're new to my channel, my philosophy on reviews is you've already seen the trailer or read the ad copy and decided you liked what it said. That's my presumption when going into these reviews. So you, as a consumer, have the following question. Is it what the ad copy says? That's basically it. It's a lot easier to see that when you're dealing with like a one-trick wonder kind of a product, or where you're buying a DVD that's just one trick and it's got a gimmick with it or something like that. Because then you're asking, well, does the gimmick really do what it says? Is it really as hands-free as they claim, or whatever? And so that's where I feel my job as a reviewer is. For me to sit and tell you, yeah, it's a good trick, it's a bad trick, is totally irrelevant, because I hate coin tricks. I just don't do them. There's like maybe 3 in my repertoire. Coin magic doesn't really speak to me. But that doesn't mean that I should give every single coin DVD a bad review. And so I basically say, look, is the method as clear and clean as they claim? Is the ad copy accurate? And how well is the product put together? So there were a couple issues. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I still gave this 4 stars. Stone status with Jim. I'm still going to recommend this. But there's a few things we need to point out. The concept of this book, Volume 1 and Volume 2, is it's mentalism on the fly. It's not stuff you're doing in a show necessarily. I mean, I imagine you probably could put these in your show, but it's more for you're hanging out with your buddies and you're talking and the conversation turns, or you steer it that way, to, mind reading, or, that TV magician guy, or weird, bizarre things and that kind of stuff. And then you just sort of take your cue and say, speaking of that weird, bizarre thing you just said, have you ever heard of this? And then you go into some pitch or presentation and you do an effect which is completely on the spot. Now, there's some stuff that it's 100%, you don't need any props. I'm thinking I think it's in the first book, which I haven't read, but I saw him talk about this in a lecture, and I thought it was actually in this book, but it's not in here. So it's probably in the first volume, but it's this thing with rolling dice. But you don't even have real dice. It's all in your imagination. It's a little game you play with the spectator, and there's absolutely no props at all. It's just a verbal thing you do with your spectator, and you don't need a paper or a pen or anything. You just do this little thing. It's kind of a fun little, it's almost like a bar bet kind of a thing, but it's very, very clever and fun. Anyway, that's the idea of this book, and it's that kind of stuff where you just do the effect on the fly without having any props. The ad copy says no gizmos, gadgets, or gimmicks, I believe was the phrase they used. They also said propless. For the most part, that's true. And you guys are going to think I'm being nitpicky here, and I'm certainly not trying to be. But there are some effects where you do need a pen and paper. Now, I kind of, let that slide, because, a pen and paper can be anywhere. So I don't have too much of a problem with that. But for example, there's one effect where it's called the bookless book test, and it's basically you have to carry around a list of words that might be found in, say, whatever the latest book is. I can't even think of a current book. I'm not very current on my sci-fi reading or whatever, so we'll go back to an old book I read years ago, like Ender's Game. You'd have a list of words that are found in Ender's Game. You have to carry that around with you, and then that's your, when the time is right, you do that as your effect. Well, that's certainly carrying around a prop, which sort of goes against what the ad copy claims that you're doing here. There's another effect which is called Back to the Future, back as in parentheses, Back to the Future, which is a great effect where you claim to have traveled forward in time by some small number of minutes, 5, 6, 7 minutes, and you have little convincers to prove this. One of the convincers is that, the tea you're drinking is now cold, even though you just poured it a second ago and it was hot then. And so little things like that. Well, in order to do that, you have to have, tea in a teapot, and you have to pour it right in front of the spectator. And now you don't have to use a teapot or hot tea as a prover, but that's what he suggests in the book, or he mentions in the book. There are other things you can do to prove, but all of them sort of require that you have some sort of props on hand and that you're in a very specific environment. In this particular one, it's more like, you're at home in your own house with a friend or two, and you just poured everybody some tea, and then you travel in time in the future, and then the tea got cold. Your tea, at least, got cold. So, again, I know that sounds nitpicky, and I'm not even necessarily saying that I'm not saying this at all. I'm not saying that Mark Elsdon was lying or being deceitful. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just clarifying for you so that you know what you're getting, that there's 10 effects, and not all of them allow you to just have nothing on you and do the effect. I'm just trying to be clear for you, that's all. There's another one that requires that you have a smartphone on you, and it has a particular app downloaded. That you have to have that app to do the effect. So there are a few, maybe, 3 or 4, maybe even 5, so almost half the material, where you do kind of have to have something else with you. Again, that wouldn't stop me from doing any of these effects. In fact, I liked almost every single trick in here. Personally, I can see myself doing this kind of stuff. But whether I like it or not is irrelevant. The question is, are you getting what it says you're getting? And on some levels, you're not. Now, it's so close to what they're claiming that I'm not going to hit them too hard on that, okay? But I just want to make sure. It's my main point here, it's less about what's the review rating on this product. It's more about you who trust me to make a decision, to help you make a decision. I'm just letting you know what you're really getting, okay? So the good, bad, or indifferent, what you're really getting is a little bit different from what the ad copy claims. There's one other one I'll point out. There's one that requires at least one. There might be 2. I can't remember. But there's at least one effect that requires a billet switch. Well, again, that's fine. But the catch there is when you write your prediction, you're openly writing the prediction right in front of them. So your choices are you have to openly write a prediction and somehow right in front of them write another prediction that's going to be possibly used with your billet switch. So you're right in front of them writing 2 things down. Now, he does have a way to sort of address that. That's it's relatively doable, I think. So that's one option. The other option is you've pre-written this other billet and you just have it in your pocket ahead of time. Well, that sort of goes against the idea of not having to carry stuff around with you. And then the third option is kind of, just before the moment happens, you excuse yourself from the table for a minute and quickly wrote the prediction or something like that. In that case, I guess it's fairly doable, but it still sort of gets away from that feeling of just that guy said something and it led you down this path, and now we're going to do this little trick or this effect or whatever. So I've got mixed feelings there, but again, I already told you the rating: 4 stars, Stone Status of Gem. If you liked any of the plots that are mentioned, and there's more depth in the written review, but the time travel, there's one, if you're familiar with it's on Woody Aragon's Woody Land, the thing with the fingers, where they start on, I'm not going to go all the details, but they start on one finger, then they are allowed to make 3 moves or whatever, and then you eventually predict which finger they end up on. Now that prediction, the way Mark Elsdon does the prediction is he has drawn on his hand it says this finger or something, and it points to whatever the prediction finger is. That again sort of gets away from that impromptu on the spot kind of a thing, because you have to have that drawn on your hand. You have to hide it the whole time you're there, and he never shows. And the way he presents it, he doesn't let them know that he's drawn something on his hand. So again, you're walking a fine line there about how impromptu is this stuff. And I shouldn't even say impromptu, because I don't even know that they use that word. But it's the idea that they're pitching is it's stuff that you can do without props, without gimmicks, that you can just, they're conversations. That's what the title is, Conversations as Mentalism. A conversation as mentalism. So I felt that it's just a little bit off there. Not enough that I feel like it's a bad, I'm going to give it a really bad rating. I will say that I was torn between 3.5 stars and 4 stars. But ultimately, I felt like this wasn't the kind of thing where he was trying to be dishonest. And in general, I think that the feeling that he's going for is there. And so, and they can be, most of them, like the finger thing, for example, can be altered in such a way that you're not having to write on your hand ahead of time and hide it the whole time. You can do it on a piece of paper and just openly write down some prediction. So there are things like that, and that make it a little bit closer to the feeling that he's trying to put across in these effects. I'm rambling, I know, sorry. Let me just one last thing tell you. That as far as the product quality itself, it's pretty well written. The only thing I would say is there's a few cases where it felt like he was kind of rushed. It was almost like he was talking to one of his magician friends, and they already know the trick and they already know how it works, and he's just sort of glossing over it, like, that one part when you do that one thing, you already know, yeah, you know that already. That's kind of how some pieces felt, but other parts, it was extreme depth, extreme detail, and so it was just kind of weird. It wasn't. Some of it felt rushed, some of it felt extremely detailed and in depth. And then the last thing, back to the bookless book test. Apparently, that's sort of a spin-off of something that was in the first book, which I haven't read, and he basically assumes you've read it, and he refers to stuff from the first one that I'm looking at, and I don't even know what he's talking about because I haven't read it. And so, again, it's a little fuzzy there. So it's just a little, there were parts where I was a little unclear what was going on. So, again, the effects, in my opinion, are good. They're all the type of effects that I could see myself doing. I wouldn't necessarily do them all, but you may not. So the question is, do you like time travel effects? Do you like prediction effects? Do you like book tests? And there's also a magazine test in there that you can just do with a magazine laying in the space. But again, it requires that there's a prop there. So do you like stuff with the finger thing? There's one where you get, borrow a wallet, a phone, and a watch or something like that, and then you've predicted if he's going to keep the watch and give you the wallet and leave the phone in the middle or of between the two of you on the table or whatever. You predict all of that. So there again, as I'm thinking about this, the more I'm realizing there's a lot more stuff that requires extra things like extra predictions, extra props like the magazine test there. It's making me question my 4-star status, frankly, guys. I feel bad because I really am a big fan of Mark Elsdon's work. But I think I am going to go with 3.5 stars on this one, just because the concept, as they're explaining it in the ad copy, is that it's a conversation. You're having a conversation with somebody, and you're doing effects with them. And I think that dice one perfectly epitomizes what my understanding is that they're trying to get across, and based on the ad copy. The dice one isn't in this particular book. So we're going to go with that. 3.5 stars. Stone status of gem. I still recommend it, but now you know everything you need to know to make a decision. So forget my star rating. Just figure out whether or not I've given, based on the information I've given you, you now know what you need to do to decide. While you're pondering that, subscribe and like this channel, this video, and listen to the Random iTunes Song of the Moment.
I see you standing here, but you're so
Yours to Hold by Skillet. I'm a big fan of Skillet, actually. They started out in like the mid-90s, I think, and nobody had heard of them. They just were not popular. And then all of a sudden, a couple years ago, they had 3 big, huge hits. There was Monster, Awake and Alive, and Hero. And I think they were all 3 on the same album. And then all of a sudden, everybody's talking about Skillet. And this is from their album called The Older I Get, I think. And it's called Yours to Hold. It's the acoustic version. If you're not familiar with Skillet, you need to check them out. Anyway, this video's gone on long enough. You got the gist of the review. Hopefully you'll be able to make an intelligent decision. Make sure you subscribe and like the video. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you tomorrow. Peace out. Bye.